Slightly better than yesterday when I discovered that the only person from the government who was able to talk with any kind of authority about the Syrian situation was Angela Rayner. Let's have a look at what she had to say.
If Assad regime has fallen, then I welcome that news. But what we need to see is a political resolution in line with the UN resolutions, and we need to see civilians and infrastructure protected. Far too many people have lost their lives. We need stability in that region.
She didn't seem to know too much about Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who are the new sort of rebels that have taken over in Damascus. They appear to be slightly unsavoury characters. They used to be part of Al-Qaeda. They've got links to ISIS. They look, for all intents and purposes, like any kind of Islamic jihad group of people. We're told they're not as bad as the Taliban, but I think we ought to be a bit careful about all this, shouldn't we?
Well, it's a very difficult situation now to work out what's likely to happen, Mike. But I think probably, as you know, David Cameron went to war in what he called I think he called it the African Spring or something. And he released all these troubles in Libya, where ultimately what happens is you have an authoritarian leader. He then falls, and you have then cells of sort of people, freedom fighters, and then they start fighting amongst each other, which is what happened in Libya. So I don't think we quite know what's going to happen. Obviously, we hope that some sense will be brought to the whole thing, but I'm afraid history teaches us that's not the case. I think the interesting thing here is, for me, and again, I'm not an expert on the Middle East. I know people who are, but I haven't spoken to them yet. But I think the dynamic of what's happening with Russia and Iran, because ultimately Syria was a close ally of Iran, and it was using Iran as a passageway to help Hezbollah. Equally, it had Hamas in Palestine. So I think this may be a sign of a weakening Iran, and possibly a sign that Russia's got its hands full in Ukraine. But we'll find out. We'll find out what's happening. It's a dynamic, and whenever you get a change in dynamic, I think you always have risk. No, the interesting thing from Starmer's point of view is his friend Lord Ali, who, as you know, I think was guilty, or Starmer's guilty under the Bribery Act, of accepting all that money for his wife's clothing and everything else, some of which he paid back after I raised it. Lord Ali was clearly, and he said it in the House of Lords, was quite close to Assad. And even when, you know, when David Cameron in the Arab Spring was keen to bomb Syria for using chemical weapons against, you know, humans, Assad spoke very strongly against that. So, and he's visited Assad on a number of occasions. So it's all murky, Mike, and who knows where the truth lies. It's very difficult to say.
Well, that's right. And I was rather hoping, if you get an opportunity, I know you're very active in Parliament, and you get questions as and when you are allowed to have them. I'd be very interested in somebody putting that precise question to Keir Starmer. You know, exactly what was Lord Ali doing back in 2013 and 2014, visiting Bashar al-Assad so many times, convincing Ed Miliband that he should adopt a position contrary to what David Cameron wanted, that he should adopt a position which was against the bombing of Syria and against the bombing of Assad's forces, which eventually led to Assad being able to gas his own people. You know, and I find Lord Ali's involvement in all of this incredibly suspicious.
Well, it's a bit, you know, I mean, it's a bit, the Bribery Act is based on, you know, whether or not somebody's influencing you. And I think Lord Ali, as you know, is a highly politically driven animal. He clearly, I mean, in those days, I think it was Ed Miliband who... It was. Labour, if you remember, voted against...
And basically, presumably, it was actually voted against what Cameron wanted to do on Ali's recommendation.
That's right. That's right. And I think that upset our relations with America. Did all sorts of, made us look, you know, indecisive, and arguably countenance, you know, the use of chemical weapons. But look, I think, and in answer to your question, yeah, we can try asking questions, but as you know, the Labour government has a habit of not answering them, Mike. And indeed, I'm chasing Starmer for a question I asked him at Prime Minister's Questions the other day. And I wrote him a letter because he hasn't come back. He said he would in the Commons, and I'm chasing him down. But look, you know, I think Parliament needs some changes. I think we need to see either the Speaker intervene and say you haven't answered the questions the Chairman would normally do, or you end up having to give the MP who's asked the question the right of comeback to say you haven't answered my question. But otherwise what happens is we just get this parroted, oh, it's a 22 billion black hole, wow, 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 and then they sit down and that's it, you know, end of answer.
Yes.
It's on sort of auto record, and it's extremely boring, and I think it's offensive to the British people. You know, they want answers to these questions, and
Absolutely.
they deserve them.
Absolutely they do, but I think I speak for an awful lot of people that watch this show and listen to it. We are very proud of what you guys are doing, because you are trying to break the mould. You are trying to, you know, work your way through the rather sort of ludicrously, you know, kind of outmoded way of dealing with people and dealing with things. Because you've also been chasing up the Home Office, haven't you, trying to get figures on exactly how much money is being spent on illegal migrants, also figures on exactly how much crime has been committed by illegal migrants. How are you getting on with all that?
Well, my view, Mike, is that good government is transparent government. And, you know, ultimately, I think the British people need to remember that the government is not the master. The government is the servant.
Yeah.
And what's happened is the government has turned the tables on the electorate. The electorate have the power through the ballot box. And originally, government was there to serve people, you know, with defence and minimal taxes. I mean, you probably know that until Robert Walpole's time, there was no tax.
Yeah.
Everything was the private sector. And since then, it's grown like a cancer, to the extent that the private sector and the public sector are nearly the same size. I would argue probably we're being lied to about the size of our private sector.
Yeah.
And, you know, ultimately, an aspirational middle class is what is required in any economy which is going to take itself somewhere. If you want a sclerotic Soviet-type economy, then what you do is you end up with central government basically deciding everything, employing everybody, and ultimately, you know, risk-taking dies, aspiration dies, and as we know, in the end, the whole economic Soviet model dies, which it did when the wall came down.
Absolutely.
So look, I mean, where does the truth lie with these things? Government should be totally honest with people. People should get the facts, and people should then be able to make their own minds up. And I think, you know, in the same way that we discovered that I think 726 million is being spent on universal credit for refugees, we're now pushing Starmer to tell us, you know, how much basically sort of benefits are being spent on all foreign nationals, and that's the answer we can't get at the moment.
Right.
But there are lots of answers they don't like giving. Why? It's the British taxpayers' money. The British taxpayer is the boss. If the boss asks a question, you should answer it.
Absolutely right. And I mean, I heard a story the other day, which I've told a couple of times, Rupert. I'm going to tell you because I think this is indicative of what's going on, and this is why they don't want to tell the truth about it. And it was from Tony Smith, former border czar, basically, when they had a proper, decent border czar, who actually knew what he was doing. And he said he speaks to many of his colleagues, former colleagues, who still work in the business, whether it's over the summer and that kind of thing. But he spoke to somebody beginning of this year who said that he was on duty and three families came from Nigeria. This is completely legal. The three women came with working visas to be carers, right? So they'd been granted visas by the government. They came with three husbands, they had one each, and 15 children. So there were 21 people coming from Nigeria for three carers' jobs, basically. And what you know from that is that the carers' money wouldn't probably even raise, you know, a minimum amounts of tax. But the other 18 people would probably be in receipt of benefits.
We can tell that, Mike, because GDP per capita is going down.
Yeah.
And I think if we all knew the truth about what's going on, we would be even more horrified than we are at the moment. And immigration is at the root cause of most of our problems. You know, there are just simply too many people here, many of whom aren't contributing, many of whom don't integrate, and many of whom don't even like what we stand for on our libertarian values. Right. So, you know, we're building a huge problem for ourselves, and the government's job should be to protect the people who are of this country, who pay their taxes, live honestly and live in a law-abiding way. And basically, as you know, Britain has always been a very community-minded, very decent place to live, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect that. And as I said on a podcast with Winston Marshall the other day, if anybody sees something, either in local or national government, that they think isn't right, challenge, keep challenging. Yeah. Don't just accept it. If you think it's wrong, challenge it. They are your servant, not your master.
Yeah.
You know, go and watch that wonderful Dirk Bogarde movie called The Servant, where the master has the tables turned on him by the servant, which was Dirk Bogarde. And ultimately, it's a brilliant movie. It's made by Joseph Lowe, and that's what we've got now. And we have to turn the tables on these people.
Yeah.
You know, most of them, as I've said before, 3 of the front bench have any modicum of business experience. That's 3 out of 26, Mike.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And it's not very.
You know, Reeves thinks she can tax us into prosperity. What a load of absolute total drivel.
Well, she's finding out in a very, very quickly. Business confidence at an all-time low. The hiring of people is at an all-time low since the COVID pandemic. That's the last time it was this low in terms of confidence and in terms of what jobs are actually out there and made available. But have a look at Angela Rayner. You want to talk about challenging people? Have a look at Angela Rayner and her apparent assertion that they're going to build 1.5 million houses.
On the present densities, you're going to add 3.4 million, or homes for 3.4 million people with your 1.5 million houses. On your own figures, we're also going to add to our population 2.5 million people over this same period. Are you content that more than 5 out of 7 new homes will go to immigrants?
Well, that's not the truth, and that's not the case.
That's what will happen.
Well, that's not the reality, because where the
2.5 million immigrants that are in Rachel Reeves' budget figures going to turn up? Where are they going to live?
Well, there's plenty of housing in the UK, but the houses, especially
hang on. You can't, on the one hand, say we've got to build this 1.5 million houses, and then say there's plenty of housing already.
I don't know what to say about that, really. I mean, there's so much wrong with what she came out with there that it's almost impossible to work out if any of it was true.
Well, I've never heard anything sensible come out of her mouth, Mike. She's the most... I mean, to think that she's the Deputy Prime Minister is a reflection on our political system, frankly. I mean, with regard to housing, what these jokers have no idea about, because they've probably never done it, is that the planning system is completely deficient, Mike. Yeah. And until they reform the planning system, there's no way they're going to build those houses. The planning system, and, you know, I have experience of this. I've been trying to get some houses on some barns that are basically falling down, not fit for purpose, not high enough for agricultural use. They'd make a perfect site. I've spent over a 6-figure sum trying to get planning permission there, and it just doesn't happen. So I think a bit in the same way that we wasted £100 million on I think it was called a bat cave or something for HS2. Yeah. They're more concerned with crested newts, bats, badgers, field mice, and just about everything else. And, you know, until they sort that out, there's just no way they're going to build those houses. But as you and I know, the way to secure the problem is stop immigration, stop legal and illegal immigration on a scale that's seeing a city the size of Bristol each year and larger coming into our country, destroying our way of life and basically putting huge pressure on all our public services. It's not rocket science, it's pretty straightforward.
It really is.
And we need some proper government. We need to stop all this nonsense of, you know, we need to repeal the ECHR, repeal the Human Rights Act, repeal the Equalities Act, and actually start to get Britain back onto a sensible basis again. But I'm afraid, you know, we live under the rule of lawyers, not the rule of law. We're driven by petty-minded bureaucrats. We're not driven by what I call high-minded risk-takers. No. And most of our high-minded risk-takers, Mike, are queuing to get into Monaco, they're queuing to get into Dubai, they're queuing to get into Greece, they're queuing to get into Portugal. They're off. They're not hanging around. They're not going to wait here. You know, work their backsides off, pay huge amounts of tax, and then when they sell their business, pay even bigger amounts of tax. Or when they die, pay huge amounts of inheritance tax. So no, they're not stupid. We're driving them away, and what we're doing is replacing highly skilled risk takers with people who, as we know, are I'm afraid, a burden on our current state.
Yeah, absolutely right. Couldn't agree with you more. Rupert, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Rupert Lowe, Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, of course. A man who is on a singular mission to get the truth out of this government. I would join him in that as well. It's a very, very noble cause. By the way, you can tell that everything's gone horribly wrong for the Labour government because they've got Pat McFadden out and about again this morning. They've obviously taken one look at Angela Rayner's performance yesterday and went, crikey, don't let that woman anywhere near the box while Syria's still going on, for heaven's sake. So Pat McFadden, who is the real Deputy Prime Minister, the man that they trust with fixing everything when it goes wrong, is talking. Lammy's not talking. Rayner's not talking. Starmer's in the Middle East. You know, hello? Is there anybody running this country?